Hello, my name is Jack Brown, and I model the Western Maryland Railway in HO scale. Welcome to my home layout and welcome to the home layout tour for the Ford's Colony Model Railroad Club. In a few minutes, we're going to head through the door behind me and we'll step back in time to 1969 and into the wild, wild state of West Virginia and see the Western Maryland in action. So the railroad room is accessible here through the garage, and the building behind me, the building flat behind me, represents what might be a typical building on the railroad with the railroad colors and the artifacts you might see around the railroad. So let's head upstairs to the railroad. Well, welcome to Cumberland, Maryland. Behind me is a HO scale model of the Cumberland station that was built in 1913 by the railroad when they expanded westward. Today, that station still exists, been remodeled and restored, and is home to the Western Maryland Scenic Railroad. As we work around the layout, you can see the town of Ridgely, West Virginia. We've crossed over and we're actually standing in the Potomac River. And we're moving up into the area of Maryland Junction. What I've tried to do here is replicate the Western Maryland as it existed between 1969 and 1974. 1974 brought the beginning of the Chessie system, which eventually evolved into CSX, which we all see here in the Williamsburg area if you go down to the station when the freight trains are coming through. The buildings like the station behind me, the sand tower, the engine house, and the general track arrangement are pretty close to the prototype. The trains arrive from the east, coming from Baltimore or Hagerstown, heading west up to Connellsville, Pennsylvania, or all the way up into Pittsburgh sometimes. The other inbound trains come off the Thomas subdivision from Elkins, which was the source of coal, and all the eastbound traffic would then head to Baltimore in the Tidewater area where it would be transloaded onto ships for shipment overseas. As you proceed eastward on the railroad, the next major structure you see is the engine house. I had the privilege a number of years ago going out to the area. It's the only building left in this location right today, and we measured it, came back and refined the drawings and built a scale model of it in HO scale. All of the locomotives you see here carry the liveries of the railroad, either the red, white, and black scheme or the black and gold speed lettering, and you may even see an early paint scheme of one of the fireballs. I tried to keep everything somewhat period correct. The freight cars, not only on the railroad, but also the ones that would be interchanged and so forth, are typical of the freight cars of that era. They carry the correct reporting marks, most of them are weathered, and we try to show the railroads that the Western Maryland interchanged with. The Western Maryland was part of what was called the Alphabet Route, and that was a series of railroads that connected throughout the east and up into the upper Midwest, and had a pretty good timetable and fast schedule to get materials from the upper Midwest, the Great Lakes area, down into the ports of Baltimore. The large mountain is a representation of Knobley Mountain. The railroad came through a tunnel and then swung around past MY Tower, which is another scratch-built structure representing the actual tower and the control point on the railroad where several subdivisions come together. The train passing has a set of GP35 locomotives in the newer red, white, and black, sometimes referred to as a circus paint scheme. A little bit of whimsy here in what is typical of a West Virginia town of that period. And then behind me is the Kingsford charcoal warehouse. Down on the Thomas subdivision, there was a plant, and still is a plant, that makes Kingsford charcoal. The railroad brought it up here, and they stored bags and bags and bags and pallets of charcoal briquettes, and then trucked it out of here to your local store where you'd buy it for your barbecue. I've been involved in model railroading or some form of model trains for most of my life. Began when I was about 5 years old, and my dad built me my first Lionel set for Christmas. And folks ask me, how long have you been doing this, or how long did it take to do this? This railroad was begun here in our home in Williamsburg in 2006. That's after I finished the room. But there are things on this railroad that go back 15, 20 years. For instance, the station behind me was built about 30 years ago. It's pretty tight up here in the room over the garage. I've got about 425 square feet total to work with, and about 300 square feet of that is assigned to the layout itself. This area of the railroad we call Meyersdale, and Meyersdale was sort of freelanced. Not really, there is an actual place on the railroad called Meyersdale, but we added a lot of industry to it because we do switching over here. There's a brick plant where they make refractory products for the steel industry. There's a pallet company that happens to be named after my son, Tommy. It's T.J. Brown's Pallet Company. The farm supply store here is known as Richlands, which is my mother's maiden name, and I have cousins that had a farm and tractor store in Westminster, Maryland. The big co-op grain elevator behind there is mainly there to hide the corner and also provide some additional switching. And the mail pouch barn was painted for my wife, Barbara, by friends of ours. And when we spent 20-some years in Ohio before we came down here, mail pouch barns were prevalent. You would see them all over West Virginia and Ohio, and it's kind of fun to have that painted. This is backstage, or as we say in model railroading lingo, the staging yard. Here we can put complete trains together and pre-stage them before an operating session, and this represents the cities of Hagerstown and Baltimore to the east and Connellsville, Pennsylvania to the west. It'll hold about 6 complete trains back here before we get ready to roll and actually operate. Well, I want to thank you all for stopping by to visit the Western Maryland, and we hope that this craziness of COVID is over soon and that we can have our layouts open again and you can stop by and see us in person.